The whole purpose of this project was to combine something really super ancient with something modern and current and just see what happened. I have been trying to learn how to play these ancient versions of horns over the last maybe 2 to 3 years, and really wanted to explore those a bit further with the residency. I think people would find them very interesting if they knew that they even existed. And in my fairly extensive research, I have only found 1 or 2 other people who've ever played them in the world. So in this project, I wanted to use 4 versions of very ancient instruments and try and make new music with them to bring them into the 21st century. Certainly in modern instrumental worlds, one instrument is much like another, and you don't get the same sort of individuality. These they were made with painstaking care and attention to detail by Peter Holmes, who is just a fantastic instrument builder. They've all got their own kind of history and their own story to tell, and it was that story that I wanted to incorporate into this project. So the instruments themselves, they were the focus point of each piece, and each piece was written with the background of those instruments in mind. But I think within that, it was really nice to have my collaborators feed in and give their take on the instrument. So in terms of kind of process, I explained a bit about the historical context of the instrument that we were thinking about, and then we kind of bounced ideas off each other as to what a piece might involve, and then tried playing a few fragments and kind of worked into a composition that way, which felt really nice. And it felt that because I already knew how to play them and I already knew something historical about them, I shared that. The one that's closest to my instrument, the French horn, is the circular cornu, and that feels to play really similar. The notes are in quite predictable harmonic places. Tone sounds like a horn. I can play to a far greater extent more what I'd like to on that instrument. There's more available pitches, and I can use those compositionally. Having said that, I think that's probably the least favourite of my instruments that I brought. It feels like there's not much story to it. So the cornu was used in Etruscan and Roman times, and it was used either by the armies to march across the empire, or it was used in social functions, playing for games, chariot racing in particular. So it had a very set role in society. Well, I chose my collaborators because they all come from backgrounds of creating new music. They're very comfortable in experimenting with new musical styles and open-minded. And this residency, I definitely wanted to use all of those skills. So I didn't really tell them very much before we got here, because I didn't want them to come with preconceived ideas. I wanted everything to be made instantly in the space between the 4 of us. Luke is a drummer who is very interested in developing his own work. He composes an awful lot. He works in jazz, but then also in more kind of free ways. Ed, as a fellow brass player, I thought the mix between a very modern day tuba and then these ancient instruments might be a really interesting thing to explore. The kind of timbre of the instruments and how they might work together. And then Alice is an incredible musician who I have really wanted to work with on a new project for years. And she is one of the most inventive musicians I think I've ever met. Her ingenuity is incredible, and I knew that having her on the project would mean that we could take things in unexpected directions. Our process was very much that I would talk about one of the horns, we'd think about its kind of personality and the sound and kind of things that sound might suggest, and then kind of take it from there really. And if they had a certain idea or anything that we could try, or just a mood for the piece. None of the horns was designed to be played in a beautiful wooden space. So I always wanted to try and play them outside at Snape. And in my mind, there was the disused warehouse space was just going to be perfect for them. That space also kind of encapsulated what I wanted to do with this project, which was to take something old and give it a new kind of twist. The salpinx isn't really a horn, it's more of a trumpet. It's the instrument of Athena. When she blows it, it's this kind of martial and warlike sound tool. The salpinx was used to call people to court, and if you weren't called by a salpinx, your trial was deemed to be invalid. Possibly its greatest claim to fame is that it was an Olympic instrument. So the salpinx had its own category in the Olympic Games. More than likely, it would be who could make the loudest sound for the longest time. The first ever female brass player played the salpinx. They're so closely connected to human life and to what society has done with these instruments. They're all quite powerful in terms of ritual and historical kind of context that they have. So to bring them here to a place that's very ancient and has been inhabited by humans for a long time, that was quite special. So the carnix is possibly the ancient horn that is most known. Carnices have been found all over Europe. They're late Iron Age instruments, and they often have got a very long piece of tubing and then some form of animal head on top. And the one that I'm playing is a form of boar's head, and they were designed to be terrifying. So their purpose was to really scare the enemy. It's a nightmare to play. It's very unstable. You have to hold it really high in the air. The head kind of wobbles around a bit. It's quite hard to physically make the notes because you get lots of resistance from the tubing, and there's not that many pitches. But it is the most striking, I think, by far out of all four horns. Its power to kind of grab the attention is enormous. It's that balance between something that's kind of this warlike tool, but then also something very complex and artistic. I am, of course, playing these as a modern-day female brass player. I probably wouldn't have been allowed to play a single one of them back in the day, so thank goodness we're in this modern age. I'm also playing them as they are replica instruments, and I'm playing them on a modern-day mouthpiece. And the use of my mouthpiece very much affects the tone, the sound colour, the range of notes I can get on all of them. So I can't say that the music I make on any one of them is authentic, but it's what I'm choosing to make. It's me as a modern day French horn player looking at these fascinating instruments and just seeing what's possible. Yeah, we were very much drawn to the Hepworth sculpture. It's one of the most iconic sculptures that there is at Snape, and the background and the backdrop with the reeds is just beautiful. And we very much wanted to do some sound experiments that involved different parts of the site. Alice experimented with what the blocks would sound like if she used her voice, and one especially was really effective as almost like a giant megaphone. And then we sort of wove in the other instruments, with the carnix being sort of present from the side, kind of interacting with each musician at a time. My favourite is the lituus. It doesn't look as dramatic as the other ones. It's long, it has a curved bell. It's really heavy because it's cast bronze. It plays really well, so there's a number of pitches, they're quite definite. It follows a certain harmonic pattern. It's got an inbuilt tritone at the top, which is interesting. Now, you find that in a few of these instruments. They don't conform to a standard harmonic series of a modern day instrument, but it's definitely got recognisable notes that slot together. Again, it's an Etruscan instrument from maybe between 1,000 and 500 years BC. It evolved from a shepherd's crook. So the original kind of idea of a shepherd's crook was used by augurs, and these augurs would take the shepherd's crook, they would hold it up, and they would carve a square in the sky. And the augurs would look to see what birds flew overhead to determine whether the auguries were good or bad for making decisions. So the lituus, when you play it, is very heavy. So you have to be seated and you have to have the bell on the ground. And because of that, it's supposed to be this instrument that can connect heaven and earth. And the idea is that the bell rests on the earth, and then the narrow tubing is this conduit that joins up to the sky. So as a player, you're involved in that, in that process. You're linked to the earth, and you're also in some kind of communication with the heavens. The lituus that the one I play is modelled on was found, and it was in a grave spot which was on the threshold of a sacred ritual place, and it was buried beneath the threshold deliberately so that anyone entering the space would have to walk over the top of it. And in the grave was the lituus folded into three, a folded shield, an axe, and then, very tragically, the body of a small child. And they were all found together. And I think that it has such power as an instrument to have been used in those kind of ways. It must have been just this incredibly powerful tool. And in Etruscan times, people had very few possessions. Nearly everything that anyone did possess was special and important. And I think this instrument, it must have had such great power, either as this kind of fortune-telling device, or as this conduit between heaven and earth, or as this kind of ritual instruments that would even once it was finished in its use as a sound tool, it still had immense power in Etruscan society. As a working musician, most of my life is spent trying to not get anything wrong, to play all the right notes in the right order. But there's no scope for being very creative outside that. It has been such a hard year for musicians and for anyone working in the creative industry. So to have the opportunity to not only do something very creative, but to be supported at every stage is really special. And yeah, I feel hugely grateful for that.
Thank you.